it's probably appropriate at this point to mention that you've got this big packet which is full of stuff, and we haven't really talked about any of the stuff that's not on the front page. And that's because I thought it was most valuable to focus this discussion on what's really coming down from the top. But I also want to talk briefly about what's on the other pages for the following reason. As this conversation has grown more confrontational, the debate has really become about kind of how much do we take from whom and when. And at some point, the arithmetic may leave us with no choice, but I also think it's valuable to talk about some other structural changes that will be of great benefit to our pension systems and don't necessarily come from that same confrontational place. So the first is, well, the second really chronologically, but if you're reading in Hebrew or Arabic, the first is a bill that I filed which is called House Bill 6150, and that takes the following point of view. It says, look, yes, there are going to be cuts. And let me just be clear about that. There will be cuts if we want the state to survive. There will be cuts. But let us also try to do as much as possible in an optional way. And this is something that has been the topic of a lot of discussion in the research world, but it's not been tried too many times in the public sector, though Ford Motor Company just announced yesterday they're going to try this, which is the idea of saying to people, different people are in different life situations, place different value on different options, and there are people in the world for whom the right to retire at a particular age may be nice, but not the most important thing in the world, for instance. So what this plan does is it says to people, you can opt out of certain benefits. You can simply, essentially sell back to the state certain benefits. For example, instead of retiring at 60, you could sell that right back to the state and instead retire at 67. And in exchange, what the state would do is simply pay you an immediate cash payment for it. But they wouldn't reimburse you for the entire savings to the state. That wouldn't really do much. They would offer you a cash payment that would be at a discount. The idea being, if you find the immediate cash payment very valuable for whatever reason, for whatever financial position you may be in, let people take that option. Let's see who picks that option and see how much money that saves the system. So that's something that I think would be constructive to put into the ultimate package, because whatever amount of mandatory cuts we need to take, I think if we can mitigate some of that by virtue of optional cuts that would be, essentially a win-win option exercised by employees, I think we'll be improving the outcome for everybody. The other idea that I wanted to talk about, which is a lot more complicated, but I think probably ultimately more important for the real long-term health of our systems, is the middle page, and that's what a bill that's called House Bill 6149. And we can talk more about this if people are interested, but here's the basic sketch. The state is god-awful at managing our pension systems. We stink at it. We're terrible. And so this means a lot of things. It means the thing we've talked about already, that we just don't make our payment. But it means other stuff. It means that we miscalculate. It means that we set up rules with weird loopholes in them that result in all kinds of abuse. It means that we have actuarial assumptions that are probably unreasonable and investment assumptions that are really essentially definitely unreasonable. And all these things provide a whole bunch of different forms of risk that leave the state susceptible to the situation that it's found itself in today. So when you talk about that, and I'll tell you when I go door to door in this district and just ask people what they think about this issue, the overwhelming response to that is always the same, which is, okay, then just don't offer these pensions. It's stupid. I don't get it, says the person behind the door. I have a 401k, why shouldn't everybody else have a 401k, and then we would be fine. So there's two really important problems with that plan, though. The first is a technical problem, which is that you may recall that we have an $85 billion debt that we're talking about. Our ability to effectively manage that debt relies upon the continued payment into the system of employee contributions. If you funnel all employees out of our pension systems and into a 401k tomorrow, then it would place us with the need to pay down that $85 billion debt much quicker than by 2045, and it would put a giant amount of pressure on us. That's not manageable in the current budget situation, but there's also another point, which is that the great majority of the employees in question don't participate in Social Security. And I would argue that in the summer of 2005, after the presidential election of 2004, we had a national debate about this very question. The question of, do we want everybody in this country who works for a lifetime to have some kind of minimum benefit, whether it's Social Security or a pension or something else? And we decided the answer was yes. And so in that environment, I think, when you have a very small class of employees, the only people in the country actually who don't participate in Social Security, it doesn't really make sense to place all of them on a mandatory basis in a 401k system. So the question is, what do you do about this? Is the conversation over now? Or do we move forward and try to somehow find a way to resolve this essential tension, contradiction? And the answer is that, here in 2012, there are a lot of ways of doing it. And the way that I think would make the most sense and would be of the greatest mutual benefit to really all the different parties would be to set in place what's usually called a cash balance system. And how that works is the following. Everybody has their own sort of what you would call a notional account, meaning you know how much money is in your account. I tell you, I send you a letter once a year. But it doesn't mean like a 401k that you direct the investments and you're sort of managing your account. It's just a number on a piece of paper I send you once a year. What is that number a function of? Well, it's a function of employee contributions in and employer contributions and investment returns. So how is that different than a 401k? Well, it's different in one critical way, which is instead of just throwing you to the wolves vis-a-vis investment returns, we set some parameters. Like maybe you say, in any year, you've got a certain minimum return, regardless of what happens in the actual fund. But on the flip side, you also have a certain maximum. So on years that the account underperforms that minimum that you're guaranteed, the state will eventually make up the difference. And in years that the account overperforms, that overperformance is used to help make up the difference during the years that it underperforms. And then when you retire, you've got that number in your account, and that number is used to calculate the pension that you're paid every month based upon your life expectancy upon retirement. So it's not a radical change from the point of view of the experience of the employee. You still work, and then when you stop working, you have a pension that comes to you once a month. But because you've structured it in a way that that pension has some key relation to investment returns, notwithstanding that there is a minimum, but as long as there's that relation to investment returns, you're protecting the employer from a big piece of the risk the employer is otherwise holding. But you don't have to shut the system down and pay down the debt immediately. You don't put people in a 401k that demands that they pay all kinds of crazy fees to all kinds of investment managers and also are left with no shelter from the risk whatsoever. It's a way, I think, of squaring the circle between those two worlds that really benefits both sides in an optimal fashion. And if you then structure the plans that way going forward, I think that's really the best guarantee that one could construct that your children and my children won't be having this conversation in this police station 30, 40 years from now.